Welcome back, honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our discussion of the Glorious Revolution, right? We're actually at my house right now, obviously not in my classroom, right? Hanging out in a sweatshirt on the love seat while the babies are asleep on the other couch. And they're very tired, so I can't shout too loud, right? But the big thing about it is, though, is what we left off talking about in class, right? So the last thing we were talking about in class is the Glorious Revolution, right? We were talking about a revolution that happened in England in which not a single drop of blood was spilled, right? We were discussing James II, brother of Charles II, and how he literally got in a rowboat and rowed his way to France because his daughter and his daughter's husband, the leader of the Dutch government, known as the Prince of Orange, right? His name was William, and his daughter's name is Mary, showed up with an army, and his army dropped their weapons, right? And by his, I mean James. James's army just put down their guns, let William come in, and they ran this guy out of town, right? And he rows in a boat all the way to France, right? Well, he doesn't actually rowed in a boat over to this one over in the harbor, and then he got on the sailboat and he sailed over to France, and he lived out the rest of his days in France after officially abdicating the throne and running away. Why, quick review, did this happen? This, of course, happened due to the fact that he was an open Catholic, right? He was a Catholic that had no problems and no qualms with discussing his faith. He had a son. The British Parliament freaked out and was like, we don't want another Catholic ruler on the throne. And so they had him ran off by his daughter and his daughter's husband, right? And so now we are under the rule of William and Mary, with William being the Dutch head of state and Mary being his new queen, right? So it's very important that we understand that we have a new idea in England that's coming about. So looking at all of this crazy stuff, you have to understand is that now we had Charles II, right? Secretly Catholic. He dies. James II, his brother, right? No sons for Charles. No kids for legitimate kids for Charles. James II takes over. Openly Catholic, has a kid. Then we've got Mary and William showing up on the shores of England and overthrowing the government, right? Now, looking back on it, though, something that you desperately need to know and something that you have to understand. Why was that whole transition from James II to William and Mary called the Glorious Revolution rather than any other just regular revolution? Because no one died, right? Because not a drop of blood was spilled. That's why it's called the Glorious Revolution, because they were able to run off this king and install two new co-monarchs, right? William and Mary will come in and begin to rule England as co-monarchs, and they will give ruling authority to the parliament as well, right? They literally acknowledge, they understand that they themselves are an entity of ruling power with the parliament, and they are meant to check and balance one another, and they are meant to actually all work together, right? William and Mary are going to create a great period of reign in England, and the English Bill of Rights is going to be written, basically considered the Magna Carta 3.0, right? So, it's basically the newest version of that document. Because the English Bill of Rights, in conjunction with this thing called the Petition of Right that Charles I had to sign that y'all didn't need to worry about. In conjunction with that, these three documents will now all go together to create a free natural rights entity in England, right? You would have freedom of speech, freedom of elections, and it would reestablish and permanently ensue the limited monarchy idea in England. So do me a favor, highlight English Bill of Rights. It is very, very important. But now you've got a very official limited monarchy in England because nothing stops the Magna Carta. That's right, right? So, the big thing about it is that document can never be stopped, right? But now we're moving into France. All right, so now look, now what you need to do is you need to prepare yourself. You need to prepare yourself to hit the rewind button and understand that, okay, so we're changing countries, so we're going all the way back before Elizabeth even died. All right, so, I know some of you are probably feeling like this. Yeah, I know, but it's going to be okay, right? It's going to be fine because this is the way you have to study absolutism is you gotta go forward and then rewind, and then you gotta go forward and then rewind, and then you gotta go forward and then rewind. So we're now going to be setting our sights on France, right? So go ahead and create a separate section in your notes that says France in big, big letters because we're talking about the absolutism period in France, right? So the biggest thing that you need to understand when we're talking about France is that there is one common enduring quality. One thing you have to remember is that coming into France in the late 1500s, there are two constants that are happening. we got weak kings and we got wars of religion, right? Now we're going to get to the weak kings here in a minute, but let's start off with the wars of religion that actually created a chaotic period of time in France that is going to lead to absolute authority being able to take over, right? The wars of religion in France are going to create a power vacuum that is going to weaken the church and weaken the nobility enough to allow a stage for an absolute monarch to take over, right? And that monarch's name is going to be Louis XIV, and he is the example, the standard, the bar-setting tone of an absolute authority monarch in Europe. Now, technically, you could argue Ivan the Terrible is, but we're not getting into that right now. Russia is a different breed. But still, getting into it to try and understand, we are leading up to Louis, though, right? Louis isn't born, though, until 16... he's not born until 1639, I think. So, we're still about 100 years away, right? So now, looking at it, though, what's been going on in France since the 1560s are these crazy wars of religion that are going to sweep away noble authority and sweep away church authority and leave that power vacuum space for an absolutist to rise up into, right? So before you can understand where we're going, you need to understand that count them, 7 different wars all over religion are going to happen in France between the years of 1562 and 1598, right? Now, this is all going to occur mostly due to the fact that there is a new type of Protestant running around in France that no one saw coming, and they're called the Huguenots, right? Not huge knots, they're called the Huguenots, right? Huguenots are Calvinist, jot that down, they're Calvinist Protestants that have come back to France that are trying to exert authority, and they're trying to convert as many people as possible. Now, Huguenots are French Protestants. Huguenots are anti-Catholic. Huguenots make up only 7% of the population, but 40% of the nobility. Now, why is that number so important? The nobles in France, leading up to these wars of religion, were trying to grab more power, right? There is this thing about Huguenot thought that you need to understand, and Calvinist thought in general. In the 1540s, going into the 1560s, going into the late 1500s, Calvinism had changed its perception on the rulership of a monarch, right? They had actually started to be like, oh, if a monarch defies the ideas of God, then he should be stricken down like anyone else, and his authority is not real. So why are so many nobles converting to Huguenots? Because they share this thought with Calvin, right? They share the thought that, oh, if we don't like this king, then we just don't have to listen to it. The Huguenots in France are almost exactly like the German princes in the Holy Roman Empire. They are converting for power and authority so they don't have to listen to a monarch, and so they can keep grabbing at power, and so they can stay on top, right? So the biggest thing about it, though, is the Catholics have the crown, right? And the Catholics have more military, and the Catholics have more money, right? So it's going to lead to a massive set of wars between feudal armies back and forth, and it's going to cause chaos and death and destruction throughout all of France, and these are considered the most costly wars of death in France ever, right? They're very chaotic. They led to mass starvation, mass disease, and also a huge amount of death, and it's going to lead to a very, very crazy, tumultuous time. Now, some of y'all are probably thinking to yourself, I know Caroline Gutierrez in my academic class, I know people like Lucy Knockan in my honors class are probably thinking to themselves a little bit like, wait a minute, why doesn't the king just roll in and crush these people, right? They all, like Lucy and Caroline always have great questions. They know how to figure this stuff out. And they're like, why don't they just roll in and crush these things? The reason why, girls, is because France has got some really weak kings, right? So some very, very weak kings. And all of these weak kings are from a family known as the Valois family, okay? Now do me a favor, write Valois, okay? Why I know every single Valois king from Charles VI is unbeknownst to me, but it's just something that happens to you when you study this stuff for 10 years, right? The Valois are spelled V-A-L-O-I-S, right? Now, the Valois are historically known as some of the weakest kings in the end of the French history period, starting off with this guy. This is Charles VI, a.k.a. Charles the Mad, right? So Charles the Mad is going to go mentally insane during the 100 Years' War. So this guy's all the way back in the Middle Ages, right? He goes mentally insane. He's wearing a jacket with iron ribs in it because he thinks he's made out of glass. He was having half of his body burned at one point. He literally killed several of his bodyguards. He's going nuts. He gives ruling authority to the English. He's very, very crazy, very over the top, and very, very weak, right? Then you've got his son, Charles VII. Charles VII is the guy that got put back on the throne by Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc is going to be the person that leads into Reims and has him crowned king, right? Also a pretty solidly weak king, but he is going to help lead France into the 100 Years' War and actually lead to them actually being a pretty strong entity later on, but still, pretty weak king. Then you have this guy, Francis I. Francis I is this dude that had this really weird obsession with Leonardo da Vinci, and he's the guy that had the Mona Lisa hanging in his bathroom for like a long time, and he had this crazy tax on land and salt that was like a really, really big thing. Also, not the strongest king on the planet, but physically very strong. Fun fact about this guy, he beat Henry VIII in a wrestling match, which was a lot of fun. But he's an eccentric guy that we'll talk about that picture a little bit later on. But then all these weak kings coalesce into this guy. And this king is Henry II, and Henry II has this huge thing happen whenever he gets stabbed in the face with a lance and he dies unexpectedly, right? So we've got the last Valois kings, but the biggest and most important thing about the last Valois kings is that, yes, they were in charge, but the person really ruling behind the scenes was this woman, okay? Now, do me a favor and write this down. Write down, like, the strong queen of the Valois family or important figure or whatever. But she's very, very important. And her name is Catherine de' Medici. That's right, we got a Medici on our hands in the Kingdom of France. She is going to be like basically a marriage of convenience all the way over to the French crown, and she is going to be married to that guy, Henry II, right? She injects herself into the ruling authority, and she becomes a very, very intense, very, 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 very strong queen going forward, right? Now, the crazy thing about it, though, is Henry II, her husband, did die at a very weird time. He was having a jousting match, and the lances hit against each other, and a splinter shot off of it and went straight up into his head, through his eye, and killed him, right? So this leaves Catherine de' Medici as the queen regent of France with several very young sons, right? She had 3 young sons in particular. One's name was Francis II, who, fun fact, is the very first husband of Mary Queen of Scots, right? Francis II marries Mary Queen of Scots, but they're only married for about a year, and then he dies, right? So, like, now, and then Mary Queen of Scots goes back to Scotland, and then, you know, la, 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 la. Like, now, the biggest thing about it, though, as well, is he had this other son named Charles IX. Now, this is Charles IX right here, and Charles IX is actually going to be a very weak king as well. Now, I believe he is from the historical interpretations that I've read, but some historians disagree with this, but this is a whole other thing. But he had a sister as well. Now, to try and bring down some of this crazy wars of religion, okay? Now, this is a very important thing to pay attention to. You got to lock in on this. You got to make sure you're with me. You got to make sure you know what I'm talking about, okay? To try and bring an end to the French wars of religion, they are going to try to marry their daughter, Margaret Valois, off to a Protestant noble, right? They're going to pick a Protestant noble that they like. They're going to ask that they convert to Catholicism. They're going to ask that they come into the family and marry into the crown, into the perspective of giving the Protestants something to get these wars to stop, right? So enters in this guy named Henry IV of Navarre, or excuse me, not Henry IV, but Henry of Navarre, right? Henry of Navarre is a Protestant noble who is going to get married to this woman, Margaret Valois, right? Now, Margaret Valois and Henry, when they get married, has one of the craziest things happen on their wedding day, known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. So to try and bring an end to the 5th French War of Religion was that marriage, right? They were like, let's take our Protestant Huguenot leader and marry him off to this Catholic princess, and they will be a peace treaty, and we will stop all these crazy wars of religion between the Catholics and the Huguenots, right? Well, what had ended up happening was, over several days of craziness and stuff like that, the Protestants all came to Paris to see the wedding. The Protestant nobles arrived, and 3 days after these two got married, Catherine de' Medici had the doors of Paris locked and had several thousand of them executed, right? The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre then led to the start of the 6th War of French religion, or the 5th, it's one of the two. Now, and then the wars of religion will continue to break out. Now, I could tell you 1,000 different causes for this. one guy got shot out of a window, and then he didn't die, and then another guy got thrown out of a window, as you can see right here. And then it leads to this big kerfuffle going on where, like, Catherine de' Medici basically is trying to hammer home the Protestant threat. She's like, look, they're all in Paris. Might as well just go ahead and exterminate them while you can. Has the doors of Paris locked. And this is Catherine de' Medici right here, the Ice Queen herself, standing in front of the Louvre, which is now a very, very famous, very famous art museum. Michaela Schmidt, what's up? And then, like, looking at this whole thing, you can see as there's all these dead Protestant nobles standing around, right? So the thing about it is, though, is what's going to end up happening is the wars of religion would continue to rage on. And then Henry III, the brother of Charles IX, is going to take over, and then he dies, right? Because he gets assassinated and stuff like that. Well, since all those weak Valois kings couldn't stay strong, healthy, and, you know, not die, the only person left to inherit the throne is that guy that got married to Margaret Valois on the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And we'll talk more about the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre in class, right? I'll give you some more clarifying details on it and stuff like that. Now, the biggest thing about it, though, is that Henry IV is going to take over. He is the Huguenot that married into the Valois family, and he becomes Henry IV of France. And he converts to Catholicism completely, right? He converts to Catholicism, and he has a very, very famous quote that my AP kids know very well. It's called, "Paris is worth a mass," right? He converts to Catholicism because he's like, you know what? I'll be the Catholic leader of England. However, I'm going to help my people out a little bit. So he writes this very important document that you need to highlight because it's super, super important. It's called the Edict of Nantes. And the Edict of Nantes finally brings an end to Protestant-Catholic war that had been going on in France. Now, interesting thing, he's not a weak king. This Edict of Nantes made Catholicism the official religion of France, but Huguenots could work in the government and worshipped as they please, right? This guy, Henry IV, is, one, going to bring an end to the Valois family because he's the very first Bourbon monarch. Yes, Bourbon as in what the alcohol is named after, and yes, Bourbon as in what Bourbon Street is named after. But the Bourbons are going to now rise under Henry IV because he is a man taking over from a different family. So the Valois have now died with their weak kings, and here comes strong Henry IV. Henry IV was so strong after he issued the Edict of Nantes that so many people referred to him as Henry the Great, right? So, like, Henry the Great would then divorce his wife, Margaret Valois, fun fact, had to know because they couldn't have any kids, and then he often gets married to Marie de' Medici. Fun fact. All right, so now, so what ends up happening, though, is they work at having children, and they end up having a son, a very, very cute little son named Louis the 13th, right? He is the son of Henry IV, but what's going to be crazy when it happens is Henry IV ends up dying because he's assassinated as well. He's assassinated by a Catholic fanatic who jumps into his carriage and stabs him to death, right? Fun fact. Now, he's 9 when he takes over the throne. This is how old Louis XIII was when he took over the throne, 9 years old. That's what he looked like. So you don't really rule until you're about this age, right? Going into your 20s. That's Louis XIII right there as an adult. Now, something that we also need to understand about Louis XIII is he's also a very, very weak king, right? Louis XIII listened more to his mom, Marie de' Medici, and also this other guy named Cardinal Richelieu, which we're about to talk about in about 8 seconds, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is Louis XIII is not very well known for making a lot of huge impacts, politically speaking, throughout Europe, right? But the big thing about him is he is going to relinquish control to somebody else, and he's going to focus on one thing in his life. One, fashion, all right? So, he actually apparently would believe had, major impacts on fashion, French men's fashion. He came up with, wearing wigs. He made wearing wigs very popular, wearing the big sleeves very popular, and also kind of bringing in this new, fashion icon stuff of France. But he also, banished his mom out of, Paris at one point, and then he brought her back, and then all this other stuff. But the big thing, though, is who really was ruling from the age of 9 up until he was about, 18, is since he was too young to rule, also he's very soft, he only really, truly ruled for about 3 years on his own skis. What's going to end up happening, though, is his queen regent is his mom, right? So his queen regent is Marie de' Medici, his mother, and then his chief minister, this guy, Cardinal flippin' Richelieu, right? Cardinal Richelieu is the guy that truly ruled over France while this man was doing one thing in particular. Getting married, focusing on trying to have a child to keep the Bourbon dynasty alive, and also having parties and wearing fancy dress and banishing his mom out of court and all this other stuff, right? So Louis XIII was focusing on having a child, right? While Chief Minister Cardinal Richelieu is the one who's actually leading France, right? And this is one of the most famous paintings of Cardinal Richelieu as he stands on the shores of La Rochelle as it is bombarded, right? And actually, I had kept recording after this, but I decided to actually draw it back a little bit. And I decided to just say, you know what? Hands up. Let's call it a flip. We will discuss Cardinal Richelieu in class, his red eminence, and his hands crossed in front of his face, watching a bombardment of a very important city known as La Rochelle in France. Very good job on this flip. I know it was really dense and very intense, but y'all got it. Y'all are the best. Keep working hard. Like honors period, A period, always and forever. Y'all are great. I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.